This conference will now be recorded.
So yesterday we were discussing about HPA, horizontal pod autoscaler. What is HPA and how it works? I see people are still struggling with indentation. I clearly told in while writing a YML, you need to follow proper indentation. So a lot of people is having something like this. I observed yesterday. Even though I'm sharing this one, right? I'm not sure who is that. They were having something like this. This is here, something like this. They're not following proper indentation. It is clearly saying unknown field, this field. Make sure you have a proper indentation. Compare with my running nodes also once. Compare with my running nodes also once. And also try to use some kind of a IDEs. IDE like, IDEs like, VS Code or other thing, right? Or you have a online AML editors, but they will not validate whether this name is correct or not. They will just check the indentation. There are a lot of online websites where you can validate YML, but that will not validate whether you are using right keyword or not. They are not going to validate. They are just going to validate whether you are following proper indentation or not. Lot of online validators are there. It will just check for the indentation, not whether you are using right keyword or not. Like lot of websites are there. AML lint, code beautify, like this. There are a lot of things, right? You can use these things, but it will just validate whether it is correct or not. But if I use instead of target, if I use ABC also, it will say it's correct only. But as per Kubernetes manifest, is this correct? ABC? No, right? It will just validate. Now I cannot have like this. Do you see? Is it saying error? Indentation problem at line number 16. Only the indentation, not this one. Okay. Okay. So how many of you able to practice HPA, whatever I have discussed yesterday, horizontal pod autoscaler? Okay, most of the people done. Only 4 or 5 people responded. I'm not sure about others. Guys, practice is very, very important. Why I am repeating? Kubernetes is little complex compared to the other tools. Unless until you practice, you will not get a confidence or you will not remember all those things. Okay. Now, let's try to understand another application. Let's try to understand another application. Now I want to deploy that Spring Boot application in my Kubernetes cluster. I want to deploy that Spring Boot application in my Kubernetes cluster. Then what and all things I need to create in my Kubernetes cluster to deploy that Spring Boot application? Now I want to deploy this application. There is a image. There is a image. This is my image. Something like this. What and all things needs to be created for this application? Namespace. Okay, if you want to create a separate namespace, you can create and deploy in that namespace. Otherwise, you can deploy in whatever namespace. But do I need to create deployment or RS or RC for this one? For this image, do I need to create deployment or RS or RC? Out of this one, which is recommended? It is not mandatory. Out of that, which is recommended? Deployment. To access that application, do I need to create a service? Do I need to create a service for the deployment for that pods? Service is required. Now this application is trying to connect to the database. It is trying to connect to the database, Mongo database. If required, can I set up Mongo database also as a pod within Kubernetes if required? Now this is my Kubernetes cluster. So this is my Kubernetes cluster. Within this Kubernetes cluster, I have nodes. Now I am trying to create a pods for that Spring Boot application. This is application pod. Now this application is trying to connect to the database. If required, can I set up a database also as a pod in Kubernetes? The database pod, the Mongo database pod. If required, we can do that. Suppose your requirement is they don't want to run Mongo database as a pod. They want to run it directly on some instance, some server which is outside of your cluster, some VM. In one of the server, I can install database. From this pod, can talk to that server where database is running directly in the VM. This is also possible. But in that case, does this server, your Kubernetes servers, does this Kubernetes server should have a network connectivity with this database server if it is running outside of the cluster? Do they need to have a network connectivity? If I am running database is outside in the cluster, outside of the cluster. Not node port. Why node port is required? This database is directly running in the server. This is not your Kubernetes machine, normal server. That server has an IP address. The server has an IP address. The database will be running on some port. The database will be running on some port. Can they use that IP address? Does this application can use that IP address? This server IP where your database is running and its port. Suppose this server, database server is in different VPC. If you are running in a server, your Kubernetes servers are in a different VPC. Will they able to communicate if database is a private server? If the database doesn't have a public IP, database server is running in private IP. If your Kubernetes cluster is running in a different VPC, your database server is running in a different VPC, does your application, which is running in this Kubernetes node, does this application will be able to talk to this database server if they are in two different VPCs? The database server is in different VPC. Your Kubernetes cluster in different VPC. What concept you can use here? VPC pairing. Instead of VM, can I go for a RDS also if required? Instead of I create a server and I install database, can I go for a RDS, managed services, managed databases? That is also possible. Suppose your application team says, I don't want to run database as server or managed database. I want to run database also as a pod in cluster. In that case, can I create a database also as a pod using database image, database Docker images? Can I have database also as a pod like this? We can. Then if it is database also running as a pod in Kubernetes, what other object needs to be created for this application pod has to talk to the database pod? Then can we create a service for database pods also so that application pods can use that database pod services for pod to pod communication? Yes. Now I want to deploy database also as a pod. In that case, can I create a RS or RC for now? For now, can I create a RS or RC replica set or replication controller which will manage the pods, database pod or deployment? But database, are you going to frequently update the database versions the way you are going to update application images? Are you going to update database images very frequently? No. So in that case, you can go for RS or RC or deployment also, anything. Anything is fine for now. For now, you can create. Then do I need to create a service for this database also? Do I need to create a service for this database also? Yes. Now, in Kubernetes, are you creating images? Are you building images in Kubernetes? Is Kubernetes using Kubernetes? Are you creating images for your applications? No. We are just deploying applications. You are deploying your images in Kubernetes. But before deploying, do I need to have all these images created, available in my registries? Do I need to have these images available in my registry? Yes. So do I already have an image for that application in my Docker registry? When I was explaining Docker, did I created an image for that application and push to the Docker? Do I have that image if you see here? Now can I use this image to deploy that application in cluster Kubernetes? Yes. Now let me write that YML. Guys, you know already how to create a deployment. Again, do I need to explain line by line? What is this? What is this? Again, you already know how to create a deployment, all those things, right? So I'm creating a deployment. I'm creating a deployment, something like this. From which image? From which image I am creating? Here I am saying Docker, Docker hands-on, Spring boot Mongo and make sure you have that tag also. If you don't have that image, again you will get a error. Now resources, based on your requirement, you can set requests. Something like this. So request, I am requesting at least minimum this much, right? CPU maybe something minimum this much. But is this correct, guys? Is this correct? As I already told, no. I can say okay, sorry, something like this. Your container port. It is not mandatory. It is not mandatory, but in real time, is it recommended? Is it recommended to have these resource request and limits defined in real time? It is recommended in real time. Okay, so that you can properly manage your resources. Now, for this one, do I need to create a service now? Do I need to create a service now? So service, I am saying Spring App, label is this, port is this, target port is this. Now what type of service I want to create this? If I want to access from outside, if I want to access this from outside, what type of service? Node port. Now similarly, can I create a replica set or replication controller for database? If I want to run database also as a pod. So let me create a maybe replica set or whatever, replica set or deployment. From which image? This image. So from where this image will be pulled? From where this image will be pulled and what version of image will be pulled? It will be pulling from Docker Hub latest image. Now, if you want to set the limits, you can set, otherwise you will remove. If you want to set, if you can set, otherwise you can remove. But if you see this editor, is it giving some kind of a warning saying that why it is highlighting in this one or more containers do not have a resource limit? So they are suggesting, but it is not mandatory, this tool, right? If you want to set, you can set, otherwise you leave it. What is the database port? Mongo database port 27017. Now do I need to create a service for this database also? Mongo service name, whatever. Port also I will say 27017, because this is not a web application. This is not a web application. It is not HTTP port. So I'm just mentioning as is. The target port is this. The port is also this. Now if you see, when I am deploying this application in Docker, did I pass for this application? Did I pass what is my database username? What is my database password? and what is my database host name, where exactly your database is running. If you remember, did I pass all those details for this one? While creating a database also, while creating a database container also, did I set the Mongo database root username and password using some environment variables? Using -e, we used. If it is a compose file, if it was a compose file, what option I used in compose file? Environment. Now similarly, can I pass environment variables to the containers in Kubernetes also? Can I pass environment variables to the containers in Kubernetes also? Yes. So what is the keyword for that? What is the keyword for that? env. Env. Name and a value. Something like this. Name and a value. Name and a value. So what were those environment variables which I passed? I think one was, let me see the code itself. Let me see the code itself. One is MongoDB host name. One is MongoDB host name. Now, for this one, can I pass this service, whatever service name I have created for Mongo database, whatever service I have created for Mongo database pod, can I pass this name, service name? If it is Mongo, I can pass Mongo. If it is Mongo SVC, can I use this one here? Here, I created a service like this, Mongo SVC, something like this. Can I use this service name? Can I pass that service name as host name so that this application will it able to talk to the database using this host name within Kubernetes? Does one pod will be able to communicate with other pod using service names? Yes. So if I give here, if I give service name as Mongo, if I give service name as Mongo here, if I give it as something else here, even though your Mongo database is up and running, will it work? No, right? So make sure you are giving properly. Now here, one more environment variable, username, something like this, password, one more environment variable, something like this. Okay. Now, similarly, do I need to pass some environment variables to this one? It was also expecting some environment variables. That username and password needs to be set. What is your database root username? What password you want to set? What was those? Let me see here. So this one. Whatever username and password I wanted to use. So database is initialized with this username and password. Database is initialized with this username and password. But if my application If I use some wrong password, database is initialized using this username and this password. If my application is using wrong credentials, again, will authentication works? Does application will be able to authenticate with the database again? No. So make sure it is correct. But here, why I am getting this kind of underlying letters here in the Visio, Microsoft Visio, because it is recommended to define it is recommended to have a resource limits and request. I am not using, that's why it is giving. Now if I deploy this YML, how many Kubernetes resources will be created? Let me delete all these applications now. Let me delete all these applications now because my cluster size is very less. Let me delete this one also. As I already told, if I keep deploying, our cluster may not work, right? So if I apply this YML, how many Kubernetes resources will be created? Four resources, one deployment, two services, one replica set. Since I have not defined how many replicas I need for this one, how many replicas will be created? How many replicas will be created for this one? One. So let me say I want two replicas. If required, can I create a HPA also for this application? Can I create a HPA for this deployment if required? Your requirement says create a HPA, horizontal pod autoscaler for this application, this deployment. If required, can I create that one also, that HPA YML? You can create HPA for any application, any deployment. Okay, but a database, this is not the right way of running database. I will explain that later. If you really want to run a database in Kubernetes, there is a different object, there is a different Kubernetes resource called stateful set. There is a different Kubernetes object called stateful set. The way you have a deployment, there is a different Kubernetes object called stateful set. So we have a stateless applications and stateful applications. In Kubernetes, what is the recommended way to deploy stateless applications? What is the recommended way to deploy stateless applications? These kind of questions also you will get. What is the recommended way to deploy stateless application is deployment. What is the recommended way to deploy stateful applications? Stateful in the sense some data, some state you have to maintain, like database pods, Kafka clusters, right? Stateful set. So I will explain the stateful set later. Before I go for a stateful set, you need to understand the values. You need to understand the values. That's why I'm starting with replica set. So even though I give replicas as 2, this is not correct actually. For a database, if I say something like this is not correct. Okay, so I'm just starting with replica set. Later I will explain how to create a stateful set. What is stateful set? We will understand later. Now, can I create a HPA for any replica set, any deployment, any stateful set if required? Yes. Now, let me deploy this one. How many database pods will be created now? Database I'm creating as a replica set. I have not mentioned any replicas. So how many database replicas will be created now? Only one. If you see, when I'm using some kind of a editor, do you see when I copy pasted also, is the indentation is proper? When I copy pasted to the shell, like these kind of editors I am using, right? It is proper. Now in which namespace this resources will be created, guys? All these resources, in which namespace this will be created? Default. Now if I want to do the dry run, can I do the dry run whether it is proper or not? My YML dry run equals to something like this, client or server. Is my YML is proper? Do I have any indentation issue? Any invalid attributes? Am I using any invalid attributes or any indentation issues? No. Now let me apply this. So if you see, is my application parts are getting created? Is my database part is coming up? Do I have a services for that? Do we have a services for that application? Now, if you see, is my application, is my database up and running in my Kubernetes cluster? Now, if I want to access this application from outside the cluster, can I use this port, node port, this node port and node IP? Now, this application want to talk to this database. So database, this part has to talk to the database. So is it able to talk to the database using this service name within the cluster? And if you see, I created a service of type cluster IP because I don't want to expose this database to outside the cluster. I don't want to expose this database to outside the cluster. From outside the cluster, now anyone will be able to reach this database part because I have not created a service of type node port. From outside of Kubernetes, does anyone can talk to this database pod since I have not created node port for that? So in real time also, the databases will not be exposed. Right? Now let me access my front end application from AWS concept. Do I need to open that port in the AWS firewall, AWS security group, whatever node port, that is AWS concept. So in any server, host, any host, let me open that port. If you see, is my application accessible? Now, is this application is running as a pod in Kubernetes? Is this application as running as a container within Kubernetes pod, within the Kubernetes cluster? Yes. Now this application is going to talk to the database. This application is going to talk to the database. Now, whatever data I'm inserting in this application, where exactly this data is getting persisted, which we already know, in the database pod, right? In the database. Now, we have our database also running as a pod, our application also running as a pod. If something goes wrong with your application pod, this is stateless application. Do we need to worry if this pod is gone? Since I have two pods, my application is still accessible, but I don't have a data loss. I don't have a data loss. I don't have a data loss. But if something goes wrong with this database pod, what will happen, guys? If database pod is deleted and recreated, what will happen? Now, if you see, I'm executing kubectl exec kubectl execute on this pod. This command is getting executed. Within this pod, how many containers we have as of now? Within this pod, how many containers we have as of now? Only one. So this command will be executed on that container. This command will be executed on that container. Suppose if I have multiple containers, I can use one option called -c, -c, that container name. What is -c stands for? What is -c stands for here? Container. So I can give something like this, but my container name is not correct. I have given container name as MongoDB container. So if I have multiple containers, can I use this option within a pod? If I have a multiple containers, I want to execute commands on those pod containers. Can I use this option -c? On which container you want to execute some commands? Now, this is where the data is getting maintained in my pod container. Suppose if something went wrong with that pod, I'm intentionally deleting that pod. I'm intentionally deleting the pod, but the pod is recreated. Who recreated that pod? Who is managing that pod lifecycle? Does this RS is looking after that pod? Yes. My database is back. My database is back. But what about the data now? Why I don't see any data? Why I don't see any data? Because pod is deleted and recreated. Nitin is asking, sir, any reason why it is not recommended to use deployment or RS or RC for stateful application? That I will explain once I go for a stateful application. That stateful set. What is stateful set? How it works? That time I will explain why stateful set is recommended for stateful applications. You will understand that time. Now, the database pod is deleted and recreated, we lost the data. So is it recommended in real time? It can be any database or it can be any other application which is maintaining some state, some data. Is it recommended in Kubernetes if you are using Kubernetes? In real time, if you lost the data, is it acceptable? It is not at all acceptable. Now, how can I maintain the state? In Kubernetes also, we have a concept of values. We have a concept of values. Kubernetes values. As of now, am I using any values for my pod? As of now, did I use any values for my pod? If you see, am I using any values for my database? No, we are not at all using any values for my database. Now, Kubernetes also supports lot of values. Kubernetes also has a values concept because internally Kubernetes is managing what? Internally Kubernetes is managing your containers, right? So here we have a concept of values. As we already know, container file system exists as long as the container exists. If the container is deleted, does the file system changes are lost? Are we losing the files, whatever is part of the container file system? Yes. So we have a values in Kubernetes, which is easy to manage. As I already told, does values is like a backups? Are you taking any backups? Values are backups? No. Values are not backups. Values are basically a mount point. It's basically a directory that will get mounted to the pod. Then we can tell the container to use that value. We can tell the container to use that value for storing that information. If I use values now, even though my pod is deleted, if the pod is recreated with same value, same mount point, will it restore its state? Will it restore its data? If I use values? Yes. So Kubernetes supports many types of values. Kubernetes supports many types of values like this: host path value, EBS value, NFS value, config map value, secret values. So Kubernetes supports different types of values, many values based on the infrastructure. Suppose if I am running my Kubernetes cluster in Azure cloud, AKS, can I use this type of values, Azure disk, Azure file, if it is a Azure Kubernetes cluster? Yes. If I am running Kubernetes, in AWS, can I use EBS values for my pod containers? Yes. Suppose if you are running your Kubernetes cluster on your own data center, can I use kind of a NFS network values, NFS storages? Yes. So Kubernetes supports many types of values, and also can pod use n number of values if required. If I want to mount multiple directories of my container Instead of one directory, I want to mount multiple directories. Can I use multiple volumes for my pod? Kubernetes supports many types of volumes, and pod also can use n number of volumes. Right? So these volumes are important. These volumes are important especially for what type of applications? These volumes are important especially for what type of applications? Stateful applications, such as databases, in-memory Redis containers, in-memory databases like Redis. If you are running Jenkins also as a container, Jenkins also as a pod, Jenkins also as a pod, can I call Jenkins also as a stateful application because it is going to have some jobs, some configurations, stateful applications, right? So volumes are especially important for stateful applications. Now, how to use volumes? How to use volumes? To use a value in pod specification, to use a value in pod specification, first we need to say what type of value you want to mount, you want to attach to your pod. So here you have a pod spec, right? The way you have a containers, where can I attach or where can I define the values for that pod? This is my pod spec. In pod spec, the way I have a containers, how can I define my values? Can I use this in my pod spec? Under pod spec, can I define a values field? Under that, can I define what type of value I want to use like this? I can define a value in my pod spec. Sibling to the containers, I can define values. Now, I am attaching values to this pod, but do I need to mount this value? I mean to say, do I need to tell my container to use this value? Do I need to mount this value to my container? How I am doing that? How I am doing that? Am I using this one in my container spec? In my container specification, under spec, under containers, am I using this volume mounts? So I am attaching a volume to the pod, then I am mounting that volume to my container using volume mounts. As I already told, if I have a multiple containers, if required, can I mount this volume to other container in the same pod? So do I need to, if required, can I mount same volume to other container also in the same pod, as I already told? Yes. Now, there are different types of volumes. Let me explain what is MTDAR, what is host path, right? We'll try to understand the volumes. In Kubernetes, you have a volumes. As I already told, right? The files on the containers are ephemeral. If the containers are gone, the data is gone. So Docker has a concept of volume. Similarly, Kubernetes supports many types of volumes. So we have a EBS, Elastic Block Store. We have a Azure disk, Azure file, like this. We have a config map as a volume. We have a MTDAR. We have a Google Persistent Disk, GCP. And we have host path like this. So based on the infrastructure we can use. Sometimes in the interview they are asking this question, what is MTDAR value? What is MTDAR value? It's a temporary storage. It's a temporary data. A empty dir value will be created when the pod is assigned to that node. Suppose the pod is assigned to some node, this empty dir value will be created, and it will exist as long as the pod is running on that node. As long as pod is running on that node. For some reason, if the pod is deleted on that node, the volume also will get deleted. This empty dir volume also will get deleted. So in this case, it's kind of a temporary data, temporary storage. Can I use empty dir for persistent storage? Can I use empty dir volumes for a persistent storage? No. It is kind of a temporary. So just temporary data, not persistent data. The moment the pod is removed from that node for any reason, the empty dir also will be deleted, right? So this is not recommended for persistent data. This is only for a temporary data. So sometimes in the interview they are asking this question: what is empty dir? The way you have a empty dir, we have a host path value. The name itself is saying host path. The name itself is saying host path. What is the meaning of host path? What is the meaning of host path? Now, when I create a host path value, when I use host path value, can I call this as my host, my Kubernetes node as host, that server? Now, the host path value is something like this. Your pod can use your host file system, your server file system in Docker, kind of a local values. In Docker, kind of a local values. So this is host path. Any directory, any path from the server, we can mount with pod. Now, if I use host path, if this pod is deleted, and recreated, do we still have data in this server host path? The host path, yes. So we can mount any directory or any path from the server to the pod using that host path value, something like this. Host path value mounts a file or directory from the host file system, from the server file system to your pod. The host path value mounts a file or directory from the host nodes to the file system of your pod. Like in the Docker, do we have a bind mount? Did I explain in the Docker bind mount? What is bind mount? Any file or directory which gets mounted to the container is called as bind mount. So similarly, this host path is similar to the bind mount. Now, if I use host path value, right, the container pod file system will be mounted with container file system. As I already told, if required, if I have two containers within that pod, if required, there are two containers within that pod, can I mount that value for multiple containers? Can I mount that value for multiple containers? If I have two containers or multiple containers, as I told already, can I use that value? Can I mount that value to multiple containers? This container can write the data here. This container can read the data here. If you have that kind of requirement, right? What is common for the containers which are running in same pod, guys? What is common for the containers which are running in a same pod which we discussed? the storage, the storage, the storage space, as well as what? Network, network space. But CPU and memory, is it, we are allocating CPU and memory, is it at a pod level or at a container level? If you observe correctly, is it at a pod level or container level? The resource request and limits at a container level, not pod level. So what is common basically? The network space and storage space. Okay. Now, can I use volumes now? For this requirement, I don't want to lose my data. So if I want to use volumes, can I use this instruction? Can I attach? Can I say use this type of volumes? Volumes under pod spec, sibling to the containers, volumes. I can say some name, any name. What type of volume I want to use? Now let me say now host path, path. That can be any path, something like this. So this directory, from where it is going to mount now to my container, this directory should be in the underlying server where the pod is going to be scheduled. If this directory is not existed, if the directory is not existed in this host, wherever the pod is going to be scheduled, if this directory is not existed, it is going to create. So I am talking about this one now. From this server, I want to mount this directory from this host. I am just attaching a value. But do I need to use this value in my container? Do I need to mount this value in my container now? How can I do that? Can I use value mounts here at a container? For this container, value mounts. So again, name, it has a mount path. So what is my mount path? I want to mount this value to this container. What is my mount path here? In this requirement for database, Mongo database? What is my mount path? To which directory I want to mount the value in a container? What is my mount path? Data /db. Now, how can I link this value to this value mounts? This is my value, but how can I say it has to use this value? Whatever name I have given, value name, that should be the your mount name also. Now, which means this value will get mounted to this directory of the container. Now, this container will write the data to which storage now? This database container, whatever data is getting generated here, to which storage it is going to actually write? Is it going to write in this server wherever the pod is scheduled on that server? Is it going to write in this directory? Is it going to mount this directory? From that server, right? Host path. Now, let me use this. Something like this, especially for database. Guys, one more thing. Can I have something like this also? As I already told, can I define volumes here if required? Here, here, sibling to the containers. Or it has to be always at the last in the YML, or it has to be always at the last? No. But can I define volumes like this? Values like this? Is it correct? Is this correct? Is this correct? Volumes? Is this correct? No. Can I have like this? Now, volumes. Can I have like this? Volumes? Yes. So value, any name, any name. What type of value? Let me start with host path, and a path. That can be any directory, something like this. Now, I'm just attaching volumes to my pod, but am I really using these volumes with my containers within that pod? I'm just attaching, but did I mount? Did I actually use the volume as of now in my containers? No. So that can be done using what? Value mounts. So this value mounts, value mounts, value mounts. We are mounting those values to this container, value mounts. So value mounts, name, name, whatever value name you have given here, same name, mount path, mount path. To which directory? To which directory you want to mount this value? In your container, to which directory you have to mount? So this is my database container. What is my mount path? To which directory of this container I want to mount that value? Can I say something like this? Data slash db, something like this. Now, since I created a replica set, if I apply this change, does your parts will be recreated? Does your parts will be recreated? Is it going to use those values? Since I created a replica set, if I update this manifest, if I apply, does part will be recreated since the database is created as a replica set? Does parts will be recreated if I apply that manifest? Yes, no. If you have practiced all these things, you should have answer for this. So database part is managed by what object? Database pod is managed by what object? Replica set. Now I have updated something in a replica set. If I apply this manifest, does your database parts will be recreated with these values? Does parts will be updated? No. So let me delete and apply. Now let me apply. But this time, am I using values for my database part? For my database part, am I using values this time? Yes. Let me delete. I already deleted. Let me apply. If you see, my database pod created. In which node my database pod is created? Let's see. In which node my database pod is created? In 93. If I describe the pod also, do you see, is it using volumes? Now, since I applied in my manifest, I used in my manifest, do you see, is that pod is using volumes, the database pod? What type of volume it is using as of now? Host path, the bare server directory value. This is the path. So this value, if you see mounts, volume mounts to this container, the container, do you see, is this volume mounted with this data/db directory for that container? Volume mounts. Now, whatever data is being generated in that database pod, will it be available in that server on that directory wherever the database pod is running? In that server, in that directory, will be available? Now, if you see, let me show that. Let me SSH to that machine. I think this machine only, 93 machine. Let me SSH to this machine. Do you see one folder called Mongo is created in that folder? So what is this? Is all this data is part of the database pod container? If you see, Docker is not there. Okay, here container D, right? Okay, that is fine. So here it is maintaining the data. Now database pod is running in this node. Now for some reason I am deleting that pod. So for some reason that pod gets automatically deleted, but I'm intentionally deleting this pod. I intentionally deleted this pod, but if you see, now pod somehow got rescheduled in the same node. Pod is recreated in the same node. Wherever earlier it is running, in same node it is recreated. So in the same node we have that value. Will I have a data loss now? Since pod is created in the same node, do I have a data loss now? I don't have a data loss. Can we execute into these containers since we don't have a Docker CLI? I already executed Deepak. What command I used to execute commands on the container? Do I need Docker exec? I already done. Just 5 minutes back I have executed. kubectl exec. kubectl execute. You can execute commands on the pods containers using kubectl exec. If I want to check the logs, can I use kubectl logs? Suppose I want to check the logs of this pod, kubectl logs. If I want to execute some command, kubectl exec. We can use all these things. Okay. Now I am running database pod as a container. It is mounted with this one. Venkat is asking, suppose we have two replicas for Mongo container and those two containers spread in two nodes in cluster. So it is going to use its own value in each and every node. That's why I am saying for running a stateful applications, replica set deployment is not suggestible. replica set is not suggestible. Let's wait for stateful set. First understand the volumes concept. Then you can understand once the stateful set is discussed how it works, right? So now the problem what I'm sensing now here, for some reason the database pod is scheduled to a different node. Now I am using host path value. If the pod is scheduled to the different node, in that case, if I'm using host path value, will it recover its data where, whatever it was used, whatever data we had in the other node, will it recover its state, or it is going to use its own host path? It is going to use its own host path. Now Venkat was asking, sir, if I created 2 replicas, now it will be something like this, 2 different host paths, right? But in database also, if you are from a database background, if I just have a 2 replicas of databases, does it mean it's highly available database? Anyone from database background here? Anyone from database background here? No. Okay. So in database also you have a clusters concept. In database also you have a cluster concept. It is not like if you just created 2 databases, it is not like highly available, right? So in database also we have a cluster concept, not active passive, primary primary database and secondary database. Now if I just have a 2 replicas, it is not like this. It is not going to work the way you are expected. If I have 2 database replicas, if this service is talking to this database, data will be inserted in this DB, but will it reflect in the other DB? Suppose some application connected to this DB instance and inserted some data. Will it reflect in the other DB if I just have a normal 2 database replicas? No. So in real time, databases will be also having a clusters concept. So you need to set up the database cluster. There will be a primary cluster, there will be a secondary cluster. Each database replica will have its own storage, but also all the replicas will be in sync. The primary will flush the data to the secondary, the primary database will flush the data, which means any data has been written into the primary database, all the data will be flushed to the secondary databases. It will sync the data between those replicas. It is going to sync the data between those replicas. If I want to have that kind of setup in database in my Kubernetes, a replica set is not suggestible. You can't achieve that one using replica set. That's where you are going to use stateful set. Okay. So if I just create a replica with the 2 replicas, now if I create a replica set with 2 replicas, this is going to be a different database. This is going to be a different database. If your application talk to this database to insert the data, and the second time if that application talk to this database to read the data, do you have a consistency in your data if you just have 2 replicas of database? Are you getting my point, guys? Here very important. My application first connected to this database and it has inserted the data. Then for second request, it connected to this database to read the data. If I just have 2 databases, without any cluster setup, do I have a data consistency? If I just created 2 database replicas, no, that is not the way it is going to work in real time. In database also you have a clustering concept, primary and secondary. So Application will talk to all the replicas. Application will talk to all the replicas. Read operations, write operations will happen via primary database. Write operations will happen via primary database. Read operations will be carried out via secondary databases. So the moment the application writes some data to the primary, does that primary will flush the data to the secondary database? If you have a database cluster setup, does primary will flush the data to the secondary database? If you have a cluster setup, if you have initiated a database cluster, it will flush the data. So if I want to have this kind of setup in Kubernetes, I want to have a database cluster setup. That is where we are going to use stateful set. I will explain this later. So don't think that if I created 2 replicas of my Mongo database, my database will be highly available. If you just created 2 replicas of databases, it is not highly available. Is everyone clear, guys? Okay. Now I have just one replica that is directly talking to that replica. It is using host path value. Now, if for some reason this node is down, if this node is down, if the pod is scheduled to the different node, let me see. I am trying to delete multiple times. If it is the pod is scheduled to the different node, the pod is coming to the same node. The pod is coming to the same node. Okay, that is fine. Let me intentionally stop the kubelet service in this node. If something goes wrong with this node, what Kubernetes does, guys? Let's take that scenario. If something goes wrong with this 93 node, what Kubernetes does? What Kubernetes does? Will it shift the pods to another node? So if it shift the pods to other node, I was using host path value. The database pod will be shifted to other node, but do I have the data? Whatever data it was having earlier, if now the pod is shifted to other node, will it have the data? No. The data is in some node. It is going to create another host path. Let me show that. Guys, you don't do this. Just to demonstrate how host path works, I was doing this. You don't do anything like this. I am not stopping the complete server. I am just stopping the kubelet. If I stop the kubelet also, kubelet is running. If I stop the kubelet also, does master is going to use kubelet in this node to manage that cluster, that pods in this node? So if I stop the kubelet, does master consider this node as not working as expected? Can master consider this node as down if the kubelet is down? So I'm intentionally stopping. Don't do anything. Okay, I intentionally stopped. Now if you see here, nodes, after some time, you can see unless until that is automatically started, I stop that. If some other process started that process, we can't do anything. It is dead. Okay, nothing is bringed up. Now can I see that after some time? You can see that node will be in not ready state. It is going to perform health check. Now do you see, is it reflecting as not ready, that node 93 node? Now, whatever pods it was running in 93 node, after some time, after some threshold time, it will wait 5 minutes, guys. It will wait 5 minutes. It will not immediately move those pods. It will wait 5 minutes. It will wait 5 minutes to consider whether it will be completely down or not. If you see, it is going to wait 5 minutes. Those settings you can see here. Those settings you can see here, right? It will be wait for 5 minutes. Then if that within 5 minutes, if that is not coming up, if that node is not again coming back, if that node doesn't come back again within 5 minutes, if it is not going to ready state, what happens to the pods which is running in that node, 93 node? What happened to the pods which is running in that node after 5 minutes? Does master machine will shift the pods to other node? It will shift to other node. Now you understand the problem. If you just have a one replica, forget about whether it's a database, whether it's an application. If I have only one replica, for my bad, that replica is running in that node, whatever node that is not healthy. So do you have a downtime for 5 minutes? Do you have a downtime for 5 minutes? For my bad, I have only one replica. That replica is running exactly on that node which is impacted. Do we have a downtime for 5 minutes? But instead of one replica, if I have a multiple replicas, if other replica is running in different node, even though this node is down, that replica is down, do I have a one more replica to solve the traffic? If I have a two replicas, if I have a two replicas, multiple replicas, you need to consider all these things in a real time, guys, right? If I have only one replica, if node has a problem, what happens? If pod has a problem, what happens? How can I make sure my application will be highly available in Kubernetes? All these things will be considered. Okay. Now, if you see my node is not ready, it is still not shifted to other node. It will take minimum 5-6 minutes to consider that as a really a failure. Then it will start shifting to the other node. Now, till then, is my database is down? Till it is shifted to another node, is my database is down? Now I have only one replica, no? That replica is running in this node. That node is not ready. That node is down. I mean to say kubelet is not responding. So it will be considered as a failure. Okay. If it is shifted to other node after some time, then it will be available. But since I'm using host path value, even though the pod is shifted to other node, do I have the data, whatever data I had earlier? If it is going to shift to other node, can I see this data if I refresh this page after some time? No. So in that case, if I want to handle these kind of scenarios also, then can I go for a external values instead of host path values? Can I go for a external values like NFS, EFS, EBS instead of local host path? Can I go for a external values? External values or network values, something like this. So instead of going host path, can I go for NFS outside of your Kubernetes cluster? That is right. You can have a NFS server. Can I use NFS values for my pod instead of using host path values? Can I use NFS value? Whether this pod is running in this node, whether pod is shifted to other node, does it matter if I am using network values? Whether the pod is running in this node, whether pod is running in this node or some other node, if I am using network values, do we have a data consistency? Even though your pods are moving around in your cluster, your pods are shifted from one node to another node. You have a consistency. But if I use local host, I mean to say host path value, if the pod shifted to other node, do we have a consistency in the data? No. In that case, I need to use some kind of a rsync process outside of Kubernetes. I need to sync all my servers, my Kubernetes servers storage using some kind of a rsync process. Otherwise, can I go for a network values like this? If I use NFS, whether it is running in this node, whether it is running in different node, the pod, that doesn't matter, right? So we are using network values. Now what is NFS, guys? Now if you see, is your database pod shifted to other node now? If you see, is your database pod shifted to 238? Since this node is down, do you see, is it shifted to 238 now? And it is to shift this one also, this application pod also, but why it is in pending state? What could be the reason? What could be the reason why it is in pending state? It was trying to shift, but why it is not in running state? Why it is in pending state? Maybe resource issues, right? The CPU and memory is not available. Now my database pod is running, my application pod also running, one replica. But if you see, do I have the data? Whatever data I was having earlier, do I have the data even though database pod is running? No, right? If I insert some other data here, and if the pod is shifted to other node, then can I see this data when the pod is shifted to other node? No, right? So that is the problem with host path. So let me make this up again. I don't want. Let me start kubelet in this one. So since the kubelet is started, now can this becomes to ready state after some time? Kubelet is started, it will become to ready state. Now this node is ready, right? Now your parts will be adjusted accordingly. Now if I remove this part from 238, if it goes back to other node, I'm intentionally deleting, but in real time the parts can be go down for many reasons. Now if the part is shifted to the previous node 93, now it has shifted to 93. Can I see this data? Now I will see other data. Now you see I got other data. So do you have a data consistency, guys, when you are using host path values? If your parts are, your parts are shifting around your cluster, do you have a data consistency? If your parts are shifting around in your cluster, you don't have a data consistency, right? Now I can use NFS values. NFS values. Network values. What is NFS, guys? We already discussed in AWS, that is managed service. But here, what is NFS? Network file system. Network file system. So if I have a NFS server, can I use NFS values with my pods? If I have a NFS server, can I use NFS values with my pods? If we have a NFS volumes, we can use NFS volumes with our pods, right? So tomorrow I will demonstrate how to set up NFS also, so that you can understand. EFS is a managed service. EFS is a managed service of NFS, right? AWS managed service. So tomorrow I will show you how to use NFS, how to set up NFS also if you require. Then how can I use that NFS value in my Kubernetes pods? I'll continue tomorrow. Tomorrow also we are going to discuss volumes only. Okay, volumes are very, very important. As of now, we did a CLI process. What is UI process? Kubernetes dashboard. You are talking about? You are talking about Kubernetes dashboard in real time. Are we going to use dashboard to deploy the applications as I already told? Are you going to do the deployments using UI, Kubernetes dashboard? No. You can have a dashboard just to preview. I have made one video around that also. If you really want to deploy a Kubernetes dashboard, there is a video available here. Kubernetes dashboard. But automation not using any UI, guys. Suppose whenever there is a change in my code, I want to deploy that code. Will I able to deploy that code using UI, GUI? Whenever there is a change in the code, I want to deploy that code. I want to create an image. I want to build the image, and I want to push the image and deploy that image in Kubernetes. Are you going to use UI? Is it possible to do using UI? No. Right? So UI just for a visualization, just to see what is happening in your Kubernetes cluster. If you want to have a glimpse of your cluster overview, you can have a dashboard. Where is that? I have made some video Kubernetes dashboard. I'll share that link, guys. Somewhere I need to search here. Okay, I'll share that link. If you want to go through, you can go through. Okay, guys, that's it for today. I'll continue tomorrow with the volumes again. Tomorrow also we are going to discuss volumes. So Deepak is asking, where can we maintain the manifest files? Where do we maintain the manifest files? Basically, this Kubernetes manifest files also kind of a source code. This Kubernetes manifest files also kind of a source code, right? The way you are maintaining Docker file, the way you are maintaining your source code, you will maintain your Kubernetes manifest files also as part of your SCM, source code repository. In that repo, whatever project, for each project you have a repo. For that repo, for that project, whatever Kubernetes manifest you have, you are going to maintain that manifest in the same GitHub repo. How to connect on-prem database server from pods, whether it's on-prem, whether it's a cloud. What is main important thing? Suppose my Kubernetes cluster is in AWS, my database server is in on-prem. What is required between your cloud to that, your on-prem? Do we need networks that can be VPN tunnels, that can be private gateways? You need a network. You need a connectivity between your data center network with your cloud network. First comes connectivity. Once there is a connectivity, then if this database is IP is something like this, does this pod can use this IP and port to talk to this database? First of all, if there is no connectivity, if there is no network, do you see timeouts? Do you see timeouts? Network like IP is not reachable, port is not reachable, right? So there should be a network between each and every server. Simple guys, one device, one device in the world want to talk to another device in the world. Let's say whether it's a mobile, whether it's a laptop, whether it's a desktop, whether it's a server, whether it's a smartphone, whether it's a printer. If one device want to talk to other device, do we need a network? Either it can be a local network, whether it can be a wide network. I already told, I think in AWS, right? In house also, in house also you have a router, you have a router, you have a TV, you have a smartphone. If you observe from smartphone, you are nowadays you are operating TVs. From smartphone, you are operating TVs. But is your smartphone is directly talking to the TV, your smart TV? What is happening? You have a router in the home. The moment you purchase internet, you have a router, right? Request goes to the router. Router is talking to the TV. So each device is connected to the network. Does each device will have an IP address? Now TV also, smart TVs also have IPs, guys. Our mobiles also has IPs. Our mobile also has IPs within that network. Within that network, can I call this one as local network? Within my home, within my home, this is my local network. Now, if my mobile has to talk to the different network, then does router send the traffic to the outside world, internet, public IPs? The router send the traffic to the outside world, to the public networks. Similarly, each application, each server, whether it is running in your data center or cloud, if one server has to talk to other server, do they need to have a network routes? Whether it can be a local network, wide network, VPN, network devices, switches, routes, cables. There are a lot of things in the background, guys. Each and every computer in the world is connected with other computer in the internet. It can be a wide network or wireless network. So there should be a network connectivity. If there is no network connectivity, even though you know the IP and port, will you be able to reach that server? If there is no network, if it is a private network, you need a VPN. Now, is your question got answer, Arvind? Okay. Okay, guys. Thank you. That's it for today. I'll continue tomorrow with volumes again. We are going to discuss about NFS volumes tomorrow. Okay. Thank you, guys.
This conference will now be recorded.